Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of our Trainz route building tutorial series. In this series I'm using TRS-19, but most things also apply to other Trainz versions. In this video I'm covering several generic route building tips. So let's begin by loading our route. The first tip I have is to look at the angle of your junctions from different points of view. This is something which I didn't used to do for the longest time and has led to a lot of really unrealistic junctions on my earlier routes. For example, here the junction looks like it's at a reasonable angle, but if you look at it from the top, for example, or from this side, you can see that it's really quite sharp and most locomotives won't really fit over that. The second tip I have is also one which would have saved me a lot of time if I had known sooner, and that is if you hold Shift while adding or moving a track or spline, it won't snap to already placed splines. So if I hold Shift and add a piece of track here, you can see it's not joined. The next tip I have is one that makes the route feel so much more realistic, and it really makes you feel like you're there, and that is to add sound objects. Yes, some objects already come with sounds, like the cattle or sheep that I've placed, but I've placed some more sound objects. So just take a listen. You can see, or rather hear, how this just improves the route so much. And that brings me over to the next tip, which is that if you press F9 or function F9 on a Mac, you can turn the terrain invisible, allowing you to see objects that are placed below the terrain, like these sound objects, for example. The next tip I have is that you can actually change the time of day and weather in Trainz. When I first started using Trainz, I only found out about this by accident. What happened was, I played Trainz in the morning, and then I went out for the day, and when I got back, I realized that I had accidentally left it running, and that it had turned night, in-game and in the real world. To change the time of day and weather in the surveyor, you need to go up to the Edit menu, and then click on Edit Environment, and here you can change the time of day by turning the dial, and you can change the weather by going over to the Environment tab and changing the weather here. Since we're already here, let's quickly go over these tabs. By the first one, you can not only change the time of day, but you can change the lighting. To change the lighting at a particular time of day, you need to select a green dot around the clock at that time of day. You can also add or move or remove these dots as you wish by using the tools to the left. So I'll just add a new time dot over here, so like here. And with that selected, you can change different attributes. For example, if you select the ambient color, you can change the ambient color using these dials. You can also change the sun color, the water color, the brightness, fog density, and the color of the skybox at different levels of the skybox. Now, if we go over to the Location tab, you can change what month it is, what day it is, the world origin, and you can enable or disable traffic. This brings me over to the next thing, which is that some assets in Trainz are seasonal. Not all of them, but some of them. So if I change this to October, for example, you can see that the trees are slowly changing over to the autumn colors. Sometimes zooming out to the map view and then zooming in helps this along as it reloads the assets. Some assets also support snow. Some of them display snow in the winter, some of them display snow while above the snow line, which you can change in the Environment tab. At the top, you can select a different skybox. For example, at the moment we're using Clouds USA, but if I change this to, for example, QLD Sky, you can see the skybox has changed. Here again you can change the weather, the wind strength, and this affects speed trees, the water, which at the moment is using slow ripples, and if I change this, for example to glassy, you can see that the waves have changed. And below that is the snow altitude, which I have mentioned previously. The next thing I want to mention are bookmarks. Let's say that you have a camera angle that is really good and you want to keep it, you want to remember it. Or that you have a large route and you want to quickly be able to go from one side to the other. Well, this is where bookmarks come in handy. To access bookmarks, you need to go over to the Filters menu, and then you've got Location Bookmarks down here. To set a new bookmark where the camera is currently at, simply click on one of these squares and click Set Bookmark. Now if I move the camera somewhere else, and I click on this bookmark, the camera is brought right back. The next thing I actually only learned a few days ago, and that is that normally if you change the height of water, it changes the entire height of the connected water. But if you hold Shift, it changes only one tile of the water. The next thing is that invisible tracks and invisible roads are actually a thing in Trainz. This tip is really useful for making realistic routes, and that is that you can actually set the gradient that you want a track to incline or decline at. Before I knew this, what I used to do is I placed a bit of track and then used the Adjust Spline Height tool to just eyeball it. So kind of like this, for example. This led to slopes being quite too steep a lot of the time. To set a gradient, you need to type the gradient angle in here, so for example 2 degrees, and then go over to the Set Gradient tool and click on a piece of track. This is now going up at exactly 2 degrees. The next tip is one that can save you a lot of time, and that is the Bulk Replace tool. If you go over to the Tools menu and click Bulk Asset Update/Replace, you can put the assets that you want to update or replace on the left, and the asset you want to update them with on the right. So I'm actually going to use the Get Asset tool here, and then click on an asset I want to replace, for example this grass, and then I'm going to choose a different grass that I want to use instead, for example this one, and I'm going to put this into the other slot. Now I'm going to click Begin to Replace. And as you can see, it's instantly replaced all of those assets. The penultimate tip I have is a way of measuring curved track. Usually what you do to measure a length is you'd use a ruler under the Tools tab. However, rulers can only measure straight lengths. So what I do is I place a train that's exactly 1 kilometer or 1 mile long, depending on what you use, on a straight piece of track using a ruler to measure the length. Then I save the train as a consist, so that if I want to measure the length of this track, for example, I can simply place this consist, so for example over here, and then I'll move the consist so that one end is where I want to start measuring from, and then I simply have to go to the other end, and I know that this is exactly 1 mile away from where I started measuring from. The last tip I have for this tutorial is to add mileposts. What I usually do is I place milepost 0 either at the headquarters of this railway I'm making, or at the station in the biggest city that I have on this map. Then to place the next milepost, I use the mile-long train or kilometer-long train to measure the distance. So let's place a milepost here. For this example, I'll use the QR milepost 1. This is a trackside object, so I'll just place it over here, and then I'll give it a name, so for example 01A, and you can see it's being displayed on the milepost. I usually give each milepost a letter to denote which line the milepost is on. So for example, A may be the main line and B may be a branch line. So thank you for watching, I hope it was helpful.